Everyone, I'm hoping to start. We're slightly late, but that's the season of arriving in this weather. I'd like to welcome everyone present tonight, members and officers, and we haven't got any members of the public, and as far as I know, we haven't got any of our independent members present this evening. This meeting will be webcast and a record retained on the council website for up to 2 years. And by participating in this meeting, you are consenting for your name, the content of what you say, and your image to be broadcast and stored to the council website. If any member, officer, or member of the public addressing the committee has concerns with this, please contact the committee services officer immediately. For those at home viewing the webcast, I'd like to inform you that if you look above the video, you will see a resources tab. Select this and a link to the agenda will appear in the right-hand side. This will allow you to open the agenda in PDF form and follow the discussion and debate. Now, can I please remind members that they need to turn their microphone on when speaking, otherwise what they say will not be captured on the webcast. And please, can I also ask that members turn their microphones off when not speaking to avoid microphone feedback. Now, I'm wearing a mask this evening in recognition of the guidelines, and I'm aware that not all members are able to wear masks for health reasons, but in general, if it's possible, and members should wear masks or sit suitably socially distanced, which we try to arrange in our committee layout. Now, I've got apologies on my notes here from Professor Ronald Jones and Graham Kerr have sent apologies. They're our independent members and they're not able to be present tonight. Any other apologies or substitutions?
Councillor McLaughlin as well, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor McLaughlin's not able to. She sent me an email during the day saying heavy cold prevented her attendance, and she's very sorry because she had reorganised family arrangements to try and get here, but has been overtaken by that cold, so I'm sorry to hear that. I'm sure she will follow our proceedings with great interest from a distance. She always does. So, are there any member declarations of interest? Have any members got any disclosable pecuniary interests in connection with any item on the agenda to state the nature of the interest? And as our agenda is largely about the petition scheme, it's unlikely, but anyone got any interest to declare? No. Thanks very much. Now, we had a meeting on the 30th of September. The minutes have been circulated. It was the meeting that we discussed the issue of the integrated care system, the National Health Service, the declaration of interests on behalf of members, and how members would work within that system, work without having to declare interests at every single meeting, so that we had a flow, but we also knew which members had that interest. So that meeting did take some time to resolve those issues, but I'd be grateful if we have a proposer and seconder for those minutes. Councillor Paul Stewart proposes, yeah? And Tony Cox seconded. Members who were present quite agree that they're an accurate record, and we can, yep, thank you very much. Thank you for that. So we have proposer, seconder, and an accurate record. Now, I've been told there are no questions, statements, or notice of petitions have been received, and none have come in during the day, none within the timescale required or suggested to the public. So we'll move on, if we may, to item 5. We have, between pages 7 and 24, a detailed account of our current petition scheme, except that the petition scheme ceased to be current when we changed our constitution, but we continued to follow the old way of working. We have in our reports comparisons with other councils, and we have also some suggestions about numbers and time limits for speakers. But Mr McCourt, would you like to explain what's before us, please? Thank you.
Certainly, Chair. There was several years ago the requirement to have adopt a statutory petition scheme that produced certain effects in certain circumstances. This was withdrawn after a couple of years after objections from the Local Government Association that it was a sledgehammer to crack a nut and was difficult to administer. So since that time, each council has by and large had a petition scheme that sets out for the public how to submit a petition, what will happen with it when it is submitted, and the difference between a wet ink petition and an e-petition that's placed on the website, and whether or not the council offers that facility at all. This was recognised when the council went into the new committee system and adopted the constitution, and this committee took a deliberate decision at that time, in the speed of going into the committee system, that this was something that could wait for a proper piece of work to be done, to look at other councils, look at what might be wanted, and put up some suggestions. So it was left. So over the first round, as it were, as the first year of operation of the council has not had a formal petition scheme. It has merely had the facility for petitions and has kept the facility for electronic petitions, and those petitions presented at full council. What you have before you tonight, following the discussion within the member working group over the last 6 months or so, is a collation of examples from elsewhere and a proposal for a petition scheme for you to discuss. It's used as its base this council's petition scheme from 2017, because actually that set things out rather well in terms of conditions and certainly in terms of the electronic petition scheme that we've continued to run. But also has taken into account those discussions that you've had as members and looking around at elsewhere at the country what might be considered best practice. So it is a kitchen sink and all proposal that includes these sets of questions that are before you tonight, and you'll see within that petition scheme that there are various parts of it that are highlighted in square brackets, which are for you to agree with or not agree with or replace. So it falls into a number of questions for you. So the first is the time allowed to present a petition at council. At the moment that's 1 minute, and a number of members have said that's not very long, and indeed when one looks at other councils, by and large, that's either 3 minutes or more normally 5 minutes. Whether or not there is a trigger point for a petition to be formally considered at full council as a debate or at a committee. If you want that included, which was part of the discussion, the suggestion here is the trigger is 1% of the council's population, which we can round off to either 3,000 or 3,500. Whether or not there should be a trigger for officers, what used to be called to account, because that was the headline of the model scheme, but actually it's about, here is an issue that we've been concerned with, and actually we want to hear what's happened about it, because it may or may not be considered by the petitioners to have dropped into a bit of a void. And then there is the potential for those rules around what is and is not accepted. So should someone be allowed to sign a petition that is debated at this council if they don't live or work on the Wirral? And the assumption here is no. If somebody's unhappy with the response that's given, should they have a right to a review? So in here is a set of words that would provide for that if you wished it. And then obviously the options of how the council responds to petitions and what's set out here is pretty much what happens. So any wet ink petition gets a formal response. It's not quite the same for an electronic session. So and what we do with the information that's put in, so there is a process for verifying that somebody does live or work on the Wirral, but clearly that wouldn't be published, and what we do with people's information. So it's all there for you to discuss, Chair.
Thank you. And to help me speak clearly, I'll just move my mask while I try and deal with this section. The first thing is that we're setting up a system that's intended to help our residents so they know what the system is and they know how to put things in. I wonder perhaps we could have a little discussion about the notice period that's raised, because at the moment I think it's like 10 working days. The first issue that crossed my mind is that in modern times, that because of modern communications, it might not need to be as long. Have you got any comments on that, Mr. McCourt?
Only, Chair, it would be preferable, so if there's enough signatures for it to go on an agenda, we'd need some time for that, but also to be able to do that piece of work. So if your requirement is somebody needs to check that everyone who signed that actually lives and works here, as well as is the subject acceptable, which I recognise is something that can be done quite quickly. But if we've got a 30,000 or signatures, somebody's actually got to go through and read that and take time out of their day to do it. So it's if you're going to have a checking process, there actually needs to be the ability to check it. There's no point 6 weeks later, after it's all been done and dusted, and say, actually half of these say Mickey Mouse living in South Africa.
Well, so it becomes a question of practicality on that point then, rather than setting up a particular target. The members, so Paul.
So, just can you just clarify how long a reasonable time would be for officers to be able to carry out those checks? I think it is. I think on that respect, it probably is pertinent that we do check that those that are signing are living or working here in Wirral. So, on that presumption, how long would you need?
That's a resource question. So it depends what else is going on, quite frankly. So what we've taken here in suggesting 10 working days is that seems to be, for want of a better word, the industry standard. So you know, what we've got here is sort of Cambridge, St Helens, Stockport. They all use 10 working days. So we feel, well, we should be able to match what others are able to do. And that gives us a bit of leeway for moving our resources around depending on what's happening within the teams.
Any other comments on that point? Because at the moment it looks as though 10 working days looks practical and reasonable. Tony.
Thanks, Chair. I'll just skip through all of the different points I wanted to bring up. But on the notice period, I think it's what the petitioners are expecting. If the petitioners are expecting a debate because there's 3,000 signatures, then I think 10 working days is perfectly reasonable. If they're expecting a response there and then, either be it from a councillor or from an officer, I think 10 days is perfectly reasonable. I don't believe that we need to stipulate the 10 working days if it is purely to show strength of feeling over a particular item. There could be something that is only affecting one particular street and one particular ward. You might get half a dozen signatures. And they may have got it that day, and there's a council meeting in that evening. It takes all of a couple of minutes to actually submit it, and I really don't see that there's any issue around doing that. If it is purely to say, we, X, Y, and Z in X road do not want this, and we want to speak out about it, and our councillor is going to submit it, or a representative of that particular group are going to submit it. I don't really see that the 10 working days needs to apply. With regards to actually getting a debate. I think the figures are pretty reasonable in order to show issues whereby it might be ward-wide or straddle a few wards. I think 1,500 and 3,000 is probably quite reasonable with regards to time for presenting them. I'm pretty flexible and open on this, to be honest. If everyone wishes 3 minutes, fine. I think what we need to remember is all of us sitting here like to harp on a little bit with the microphone on. For most people, a general public, 1 minute, me in particular, Jeanette, yeah, you're right, but most people, the general public, don't do any public speaking, and 1 minute is actually quite a long time. If you're going to present something, so I don't know, if you 1 minute, 3 minutes, whatever, at the end of the day, it's pretty much down to the chair anyway, or the mayor at the full council, whether they give a little bit of extra time anyway, down to their feelings at the time. So if I'm quite flexible on that.
Just deal with some of these points. I was working through it in a sort of logical way, which is unusual for me. But the first issue we were looking at was this notice period. I think it was a distinction you were drawing between council, where there might be something big, and a committee. The committee might well have an item on its agenda anyway, and therefore people would have had time to prepare for it, and officers might be expecting it. So as things stand, I get the feeling that members would be quite content with 10 days for practical reasons. Janet?
Yeah, I kind of agree with that. I was just going to double check what the timescale is for publishing agendas for committees, because if that's 10 days prior, then that's our 10 days. So I think we should be flexible, because something might appear for the first time in the public domain, which means that residents who might want to come and present a petition will have to organise themselves. And the 10 days will start ticking from the point at which the agenda is released. Is that right?
So,
Yeah,
can we build something in that reflects that without overcomplicating things?
As I say, the reason for suggesting 10 working days, which is 2 weeks, is to give us time to go through any petition. If we're using the publication of an agenda as the trigger, then that's, as you say, it's 9 calendar days before the meeting. But if that's the trigger for somebody to then go out and organise a petition and submit it and present it and have us check it, actually I can't see that happening. Is there an example of where someone...
I think it would be, as Tony's just said, the smaller, few signature kind of petitions. Anything big would take longer than that anyway to organise. That's why I was just saying a tiny bit of flexibility for the petition that's got 10 names on from a small road somewhere.
So could I just ask then, is it flexible enough that if on the night of a particular item, the chair of a committee becomes aware that some residents have taken the time and trouble to put something together, that's a matter for the chair to accept it, because we wouldn't be saying, oh, it hasn't fulfilled 10 days, you're all right. As chair, I will accept this.
I think that flexibility is there, Chair. At the moment, every committee agenda has the ability of a member of the public to come along and make a statement about something on that agenda. Chances are what they would do is come along to make their statement, and as part of the statement say, and look, I've got these signatures I've collected over the last few days. Whether we actually build something into here or not, I'm loath to write something informally that allows a coach and horses to be driven through it, but there is always that chair's discretion. And anyway, if somebody came along as part of the statement and said, and I've got these, but these signatures, you're not going to turn around and say, well, we're not going to look at that, go away, we're not going to look at it for 10 days.
Chair, I think that's reasonable, to be honest.
So as far as I see it, for practical reasons, we accept the 10-day notice period, but that, as outlined, arrangements can be made, if necessary, with chairs to cover issues that crop up in short notice. Yep. So we dealt with that part of it, which is on my list is really part B. I'm going to go back, if I may, to the issue of time. I'm very conscious that it's members of the public have taken time to get to council. They might be perhaps anxious about what they see, even over-order what they see. But I'm going back to one petition that I remember being presented about an accident involving a young boy at Spittal Crossroads. and where the member of the public, I think, addressed council, found that they were up against this time thing, and everyone felt that the time limit was far too short. It was perfectly reasonable to allow the mayor allowed the resident to speak. So I'd like to suggest that 3 minutes is, up to 3 minutes, is a reasonable time for the public to present a petition. It's not 5 and it's not 1, but 3. Paul Stewart.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I mean, I would agree. I would agree with that. And again, I don't think it's relevant to sort of be arguing whether it should be 3, 5, 10, because, as you said, you know, the mayor will use their discretion, and so will the chairs of those committees. What we can't accommodate for, in given a timescale, is somebody's, I think, comments have been made about nervousness, but they could have a speech impediment which could slow them down and things like that. So I think, you know, the human side of us would allow more time in any case. So I would agree with the 3 minutes, but given the flexibility to the chair of that relevant committee.
Yes, you quite rightly raised issues there, Councillor Stewart, about people's personal approaches to things and the way they may find themselves in a large gathering and nervousness and so on. So that's some discretion there, I kindly understand. Members content with 3 minutes? Right, thank you very much. Now, there are a number of other pointers in this, and the next one is the issue of the call for evidence. Now, and the number of signatories required to trigger it. Perhaps you just reflect on what was in that document for us, Mr. McCourt, because asking here for particular work to be done on a petition by officers or call for evidence, just to clarify quite what we mean there.
So it's a call for usually an officer to come along to a council meeting and explain a situation, so progress on an issue or advice that they're given to elected members. So it may be an ongoing issue with the community, you know, street lights or what have you, suddenly springs to mind, and the members of the public not knowing the situation, wanting to know more, and so there's enough of them that says this is of public interest, we want to hear what this person has got to say.
It is not a hurdle, but it's a recognition by officers that something in discussion with petitioners or members can require more work.
Or just an explanation. So it's phrased literally as you know, give evidence at a public meeting.
So I'll throw it open to members for comment. Janet, thanks.
Yeah, I think we need to be a bit careful with this one, to be honest. I think there are mechanisms already whereby our residents can get information verbally or written, and they should be, I'd like to think that they are approaching their ward members, who in turn will then bring it up at the relevant committee or ask their colleagues who are on that committee to bring it up. I just think that, you know, given the scope of the committee's structure is much more transparent in that respect for our residents. They can watch meetings, they can influence through questions, they can get the ward members to input. I just think that this is one that we would need to think about, really. I would like to think that there's nothing that hasn't been covered on any given issue that would be unearthed by one of our residents calling for this. That's my instinct on it anyway.
Paul Stewart, you've signalled.
Yeah, I just seek a point of clarity on what you mean by a public meeting, because Phil, you just said that an officer could be called to a public meeting. I'm assuming what you mean is a council meeting or a council organised meeting, not a meeting organised by a member of the public in the public.
No, I wouldn't want to see us actually hung from the street lamp that isn't working. No, I do mean a council committee. And we would phrase it in that way, so I've used the standard wording, but...
I'll just look over and see if there's any comments from members. No. I think what we're looking at is that officers, because of working arrangements with members, ward members, and cooperation with the residents or members of the public would be providing information, and that the inclusion of a call for evidence as such is not specifically required. I think that's where we've come to. Yeah. 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 So, yeah. The members content with that formula?
If I may,
Yes,
Chair,
thank you, Mr. McCall.
this was one of the bones of contention with the original mandatory scheme that was put out. It did make a lot of people feel uncomfortable. The trigger at that point was extremely low. I think how that's developed is, yes, a number of councils don't have it at all, but those that do have phrased it in this way and set that bar, and the bar suggested here is, I'm sure what you're about to go on to, as 0.5% of the population. So it has to be significant enough, because what happened when this became the mandatory scheme originally is that there were a few individuals or certain smaller campaign groups that filled up council committee agendas and on single issue vexatious matters, and we'd wish to see that avoided.
I think from what was shared a few minutes ago, that members feel that the close working relationship between ward members, officers and involving the member of public in that should not need to go for a full process of calling for evidence. Yeah. Yeah. Now, the next issue was council. I can remember a debate about a shopping centre based on a planning matter at council with about 3,000 signatures about 2 years ago. Now, members have seen a report that suggested a percentage of Wirral residents, and some councils we've seen have a specific figure. So I'm open to suggestions about the figure required for an item petition presented to council to trigger a debate there and then, is I think what we're talking about. Mr. McCall, clarify for me.
Thank you. The proposal, Chair, is it wouldn't be a debate there and then. Is usually petition handed in at that council, and then it's placed on the agenda of the next council, so that everyone has a bit more of a notice and a warm-up to it, because clearly to be debated something needs to be on the agenda. So the first question is, do you think it's a worthwhile use of council time to have such a debate? And then secondly, of course, what the trigger should be, and those do, as you see from the figures, vary quite considerably.
Just take members' comments on that, because I had a figure of 1,000 in mind, but that may be considered too small. But for those involved, they have taken the time and trouble to put together a petition of 1,000, and obviously hoping to speak about it. But members may feel with the weight of other things we've got that 1,000 might be too small to debate, to lead to this debate. I'll take views on it, if I may. Councillor Williams, you haven't spoken this evening yet. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. Just on the matter of what Mr McCourt said about the there and now having, I know normally it wouldn't be. If it was a petition like you mentioned before about the crossroads and the child being injured, surely if it was something like that, if we could do it there and then, that would be a lot more sensible, because sometimes there's big gaps between the next council meeting, and if it was a road safety issue, it should be dealt with there and then.
To me, it's where something, because you're right that meetings aren't that frequent, I think 6 or perhaps 8 a year if we're lucky, that there may well be issues that happen that lead people to want to get hold and send something to the council fairly quickly. I'll take Steve's point on that. Any other members want to comment while we're working through this? Thank you, Tony.
Thanks, Chair. I'm just looking at the figures. I think one thing we can take from that is that Birmingham Council don't like having debates on petitions. 20,000 signatures. I think 3,000 isn't a bad figure, to be honest. Let's say it's a specific ward issue. We all know the one in my ward, which will get 3,000 signatures, no bother whatsoever. But it's a quarter of the electorate, which is still a reasonable amount. And if it's spanning more than a few wards, you'd get 3,000 no bother anyway. But you know, for ward-specific issues, you're talking a quarter of the electorate. That's not an unreasonable ask, I think, to trigger a debate.
Thank you for that thought. I'll just ask Paul, how do you feel about 3,000? We seem to be heading towards from my 1,000 to 3,000 being reasonable.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think definitely not the 1,000, Chair. I think the 1% is probably a starting point. I appreciate what Councillor Cox just said about it being a percentage of a ward, but what we don't have control over is who will sign that petition. You know, so someone who supports that petition in your ward may live in my ward. So I would argue that from a practicality point of view, if we end up with lots of petitions that then start to dictate our agenda for full council meetings, that's my concern. So I would be at a starting point of at least the 1%, 3,000, but I would be more inclined to want a bit higher than that, personally.
And Janet, thank you.
I think I agree with that, Chair. I mean, I've no doubt that 3,000 is really achievable in certain wards. But, you know, is full council there to debate ward issues? Really, it's full council. And I've just, again, a bit of trepidation. I think that this system could be open to abuse is a strong word, but maybe misuse. And so, you know, there will be certain petitions that will attract 3,000 on a regular basis. And will that start to dominate full council? And is full council the appropriate arena for that? Where the issue could be and has been probably debated ad infinitum in other spaces. So it's just a concern, particularly, I agree with Paul about the 1% is, well, that would be pushing it for me, 3,000.
That 1% is like a movable feast as our population changes and what 1% actually means to people. I've heard what's said about 3,000, and I think that the committee could probably work with 3,000, and if it was abused or there were problems that kept coming up, members would say, well, actually 3,000 hasn't proved to be workable. But I don't want to stifle debate on this. Tony?
Yes, yeah, I think it's just, well, 2 points. The first one is, I'm sure, I don't know whether there is a mechanism or would be a mechanism whereby in exactly the same way as if a question is submitted and it can't be, it doesn't need to be answered at a specific committee again or council if it's within the last 6 months. There's absolutely no reason why the same, if it's not already the case, the same restrictions can't be applied to petition debates as well. I think what I would say is we've just sat through our working group before, and while the slides were flashing up quite quickly from Mr. Fox, one of the things that it did say, I noticed on the comments from members, was that the debates, some of the debates that we have at full council, members seem to think are pointless. So I would suggest that maybe if we actually had debates on things that directly affect ward residents, that would have much more bearing on what our actual role is, rather than some of the debates that we do have. So I think it could actually focus minds on things that people outside of our little bubble want to actually talk about. So I think there is a benefit to it.
Oh, thank you. Yes, sorry.
So I was about to raise that issue, and it's quite right. I mean, we bear in mind our governance, that we're saying our full council meetings are not really fit for what they're supposed to do, and most councillors don't like them, and most officers don't like our full council. Then it should be a way of the public being able to raise serious issues that we would debate in all seriously, that are local issues, instead of some of the strange notions of motions we have that don't affect us locally. So I think, yes, we should have this so you can raise it on the full council, but I think the signatures have to be significantly higher than 3,000 to make it serious. You know, obviously Birmingham's a large, huge organisation, so that's why it's 20,000. But I think if you're going to have signatures, you have to have real serious numbers, 5,000, 10,000, which is a serious issue to raise by petitions to bring to full council. With all due respect, be quite easy to get 3,000 petitions, and we'll end up with the like beaches back on the agenda again with 3,000 people in their ward, and I don't think it's for that though, and I could see that's quite easily happening, and we'd end up again bringing full council into a joke again. So I think if we're going to have it, yeah, have it for serious issues, whittle the issues, and serious numbers of people to organise it.
To some extent, Carl, you've anticipated the issue about repetitive petitions, which we can come to later. I think at this stage, from what I've heard, the majority of members, whilst there's some misgivings about going above 3,000 and some interest in whether the issue that got 3,000 might have been dealt with at committee or other places first, I think we should go for 3,000 and then review it in practice and see how it works out. But Paul, go on, I'll listen to what you have to say.
Sorry, Chair, just, you know, as a starting point, I contributed and said that 1%, i.e. 3,000, would have to be a minimum. We've had a proposal from Councillor Greenie of 10,000, which I'll be happy to support that as a proposal. I think it's a bit dismissive to say there's just some misgivings. It's not just some misgivings. You know, that we do have concerns that having too low a threshold could create a scenario that becomes out of control. So it's about asking the members of the public to channel what they want to in asking us to debate things at council. Having it too low then does run the risk. I'm sure every single one of us in our own wards could get 3,000 signatures every month on a specific issue. Is that the route that we want to risk going down? So there is another proposal there. Thank you.
I've heard what was said. I'm sorry, I hadn't realised that Carl had actually moved 10,000. It's my hearing. I'm sorry. Apologies, Carl. I hadn't realised you'd done that. So we have... At the Mr. McCall, yes.
If I may, Chair, because there were some questions in there as well.
Yes.
So if I can address those questions, and then you can hone in on this issue, if that's all right. So just before you move on to that, so there was the question of what gets this on the agenda, and forgive me, I was just using the example of because at the moment members tend to present those petitions, so we get them cold. But actually what we've put in here is, if someone meets the trigger, then we will go back to them and say, you'll be on the next agenda, which is, so if it comes in good time to go on the agenda, it goes on the agenda. If you miss that, it's on the next one. So there's that. There is, on page 21, the exceptions. So those include the obvious. So if it's vexatious, if it's unlawful, if it's defamatory, we say no. And your point there is covered, Councillor Cox, which is to say, if it's a repetitive petition, so it's already been dealt with, we'll publish it because we put it on the council's website, but we won't do anything with it because it's already been talked about. And likewise, if we get several petitions in, treat it, but you know, that are substantially the same, we put them together and we'll treat them as one. So I hope that addresses those points. Just in terms of the maths, Chair, which may or may not help you, obviously 1% more accurately will be 3,250, 1.5% will be 5,000, and therefore 3% will be 5,000, will be 10,000. So there's some fairly neat percentages there that turn into numbers that you may or may not want to play with. So 1.5, 3 buys you 3,250, 5,000, 10,000. Chair.
I appreciate there's some conferring taking place, but as things stand procedurally, and you'll tell me if I'm wrong, Councillor Carl Greenie moved that... Oh, sorry. I'm sorry, Chris. You were so quiet down there, I didn't see your hand. Yeah, please. Sorry.
Yeah, I'm quiet until the Master speak, which is, I suppose, what we're meant to do, isn't it? Yeah, I can see there's a lot of feeling for the 3,000, 1%, perhaps on this side. Seems perfectly reasonable to me. And 10,000 over there. I'm also thinking about these have to be verified, don't they? So there's more work in verifying 10,000 than 3. So I would have thought a compromise of somewhere in the middle of about 5,000 would be perhaps a better starting point. Don't know, just trying to be reasonable.
Always trying to be reasonable. Councillor Williamson, Janet, please.
In the spirit of reasonableness, we're happy to go with 5,000.
Right. Well, it looks, I'm content because other channels have been suggested and timescales have been suggested that there might be ways in which something that builds up would be dealt with before it came to council in some way, and officers would be aware of an issue, members would be aware of an issue, and it might not necessarily come. But I've heard the debate, and 5,000 has been suggested as a compromise. Councillor Green, you moved 10,000. Do you want to change, to withdraw that and move 5,000? So just to make sure I've heard that, you're happy with 5,000. Councillor Green's moved that the trigger should be 5,000. Is that seconded by Councillor Williamson? Is there an amendment to 5,000?
Yeah, I mean, I would, if I even thought it was worthwhile for the voting intentions, I would move that we went to 1% and move from there if we believed it was being abused. That's still a lot of people. That's what, 3,250 people. That's still a lot of people for most items for which petitions come in. They don't have anywhere near that. It's normally a few hundred if you look at what actually gets submitted at full council, for argument's sake. I think 3,250 at 1% is quite reasonable. I wouldn't want us to put it to the point where everyone knows there's a petition scheme that could generate a debate, but it's just absolutely improbable for them ever to get to that amount of signatures.
Yes. Well, sorry, yes, Gillette, yes.
Yeah, I know what you're saying. I know what you're saying there, Tony. But I think if it's a debate that's worthy of being, if it's an issue that's worthy of being debated at full council, then given the population of the borough, I would hope that support would cross a ward boundary for something that's going to take up time at full council and have us debate it. So I don't think it's unreasonable to ask for 5,000.
I see Councillor Falk signalling as well.
Yeah, I mean, we can all get hung up on numbers. I think what the important thing for the public is what actually happens to the petition when it arrives. And all too often, I've been in a position, and we've all been in a position as members, where we've received a petition of full council, and because we can't give the answer that the public wants, we either note it or it ends up going to the committee, and the committee is probably where the real work would get done. And if there's any strength in the committee system to be applauded, it does do that, has that capability. So my view is, you can argue the numbers. I'll vote for whatever number seems reasonable. Both those figures, by the way, make us look normal as a normal council. So we're not doing anything, outlandish. But it's actually what happens. And for example, the Crossroads one that was mentioned by Steve, that actually went to the committee, the appropriate committee, and there was a longer debate. As I understand it, under these, we'd only have 15 minutes to debate it anyway. So you're not going to actually give them the answer or flush out what needs to be done for the next stage of that petition to either be successful or to explain why it's not going to be successful. So my view is, it gets to council, it gets the attention, and then it moves on. So I'm happy that we're in the right boundaries of normality.
So just to sort out the procedures, if I may, I'm warm to the argument about 5,000. Having started with 1,000, I've moved up to 5,000 because I'm hearing a debate about what other mechanisms are available to the public, and that council might not be the right place in the first, but there is the opportunity for moving it to committee and looking at the issue in detail, as been mentioned by Councillor Fawkes. So, Councillor Green, you mentioned 5,000, and is there an amendment to that?
It's starting to sound like we're in an auction now.
No, I didn't mean it that way.
No, Chair, but we'll be happy to accept 5,000.
Right. So, thank you for members for debating this properly. The committee is minded.
Sorry, Chair.
Sorry,
can I just ask? Sorry, just for clarification, members. Do you want me to leave that as a hard number, or are you happy I describe that as 1.5%? So it becomes a bit descriptive and discussed.
Just in case we have a population boom.
Yeah, well, who knows? I know. It was just a way to describe it.
So thank you, Mr. McCourt, for that guidance. When we redevelop as we would like with all his brownfield sites. Who knows what might happen? Councillor Chris Jones.
I think it should be a number for the public so that they know exactly how many signatures they need to collect. It can be very difficult, can't it, saying 1.5% of the population when they haven't got a clue probably how many it is.
Yeah. Well, Councillor Graney did have come with a figure. Mr. McCall.
No, just forgive me for confusing. It's just a descriptive thing. So what we put afterwards is, you know, that's approximately this percentage of the population. So it just gives it some traction out there as why that was come to. And
so, put it this way, after thorough consideration, the committee believes that a figure of 5,000 residents is an appropriate number to trigger debate at council. Yep. Agreed. Right, thanks very much. Now, there's an issue here about repetitive petitions, which began to be discussed. It's a question of how often something comes back. Years ago, I don't know if Vicky Shaw would help, but there used to be a 6-month rule, if I remember rightly. Might still be somewhere in the Constitution, I think. I can't remember it. But there is. Yes, I remember a 6-month rule. The council couldn't debate or re-debate something after 6 months. But I'll take, what would you like to tell us, Mr. McCourt?
It was there as much to highlight, Chair. So the phrase in here is in the past 6 months, so it accords with motions to council as well. So I think that's kind of been mentioned. The next one is more of a straightforward question, which is taken practice from some other councils. It's what happens if somebody submits a petition for something to be done in their street, what have you, an officer responds and they're not happy with that response. And so there is, right at the end here at page 24, there is the phrase there that if somebody feels that council has not dealt with the petition properly, they have the right to request that a council committee reviews the steps that the council has taken in response to the petition. And it's whether or not you want to have that in there, or does it overcomplicate things, and as you say again, could be used, abused and clog up committee time. So there's a balance there.
I think we started to discuss the issue of repetitive petitions and whether things come up more than every 6 months. Paul.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I mean, with regards to the repetitiveness, I think if we just align it with our own constitution of 6 months, I think that makes more sense to keep it a 6 or make it 6 months. And with regards to whether somebody believes that the petition answer, or they're not happy with the answer that they've got from the debate or the petition, again, it's subjective to individuals, and so and potentially open to abuse or you know something like that. So I don't think that option really should be there, but I think the 6-month rule is quite reasonable.
So I'll just try and find the right 4 words. The council will not consider a matter further if a petition has been received on that issue in the previous 6 months. Is it that the right kind of thing? Janet, yeah.
Yeah, that's fine. Just on the second issue as well, it's a little bit like, you know, when someone appeals a court ruling, isn't it? And, you know, unless there's been some kind of fundamental error made, you know, I don't see any grounds for someone coming back just because they don't like the answer. I mean, obviously it's fair to say if an officer inadvertently gives unfactual information, that we all realise whilst we're sitting there, hang on a minute, that doesn't sound right. But I think generally having 2 bites of the cherry isn't on just because you don't like the answer that you're given.
Right. So, any comments on that? I think we've found that Janet's advice is a formula has been found that unless something's clearly wrong, there's no necessity to go through the right to review process.
Well, I think things start to become circular then, don't they? And I'm sure we've all been involved over the years in email correspondence that's just gone on and on and on because whomever is emailing us has not liked what we've said. And there's no reason other than they don't like it to challenge it, and then we get trapped in that cycle then. So I just think for you know, unless something is said by an officer that is palpably not true. I don't really think coming back because you don't like it is the right thing.
I think the conclusion is, Steve, you haven't spoken on this one.
Yeah, just to follow on from what Jeanette's saying there, I think if there was to be wording as such in there, it's something like, if not procedurally correct. So as long as the procedure has been correctly done, as Jeanette says, it's not the actual decision that's being challenged, it's the procedure.
I think trying to find a way through this is to say that the council will always use its best endeavours to deal with petition in a proper manner. That cover it? Thank you, Mr. McCourt. Now, options of how we respond really involves what we say to the petitioner by letter or contact with officers. Will you just outline that?
Chair, this is not so much a question from us to you in the committee as the previous ones have. It was just to highlight that we've set it out as a list on page 22 and just asking whether members are comfortable with it being described in that way. We've tried to be as fulsome as we could be in that list. Anything we've missed, are you happy with the way that it's set out? That's all.
I've been working on the basis that we all had page 22 and studied it, so content that the officers should use that suite of arrangements to respond appropriately. Yep. Thank you. Now, I think we've taken this in stages. Officers have made a careful note of what we decided at each stage. Councillor Fowkes.
Yes, Chair, I think there's reference made within the report about areas where we're not directly in control of. And I certainly, Paul will be aware that other organisations have petition procedures that they operate. For example, the Transport Committee for the City Region and the Metro Mayor, aka Mersey Travel, has a petition procedure. So would it not be logical for this particular piece of communication to signpost members of the public to those other organisations where it might be more appropriate for the petition to go? I don't know whether Waste Authority have a petition system. I've never sat on that particular, well, haven't for a number of years, sat on that committee. We used to have a police authority that had a petition system, but I'm just sort of thinking of those other organisations within our city region where it might be more valid for members of the public to take a petition to. If it's not, you know, all we'd have to do is signpost it and say, if you think your petition is more appropriate to this organisation, this is how you contact them. Simple as that.
Based on what's been said from Councillor Fowkes' experience, would officers accept that in the event of a petition not relating specifically to a function of Wirral Borough Council, but to the function of another body in the regional area, officers will assist the resident in seeking the appropriate recourse?
Yes, Chair, more than happy to include that. I mean, obviously in discussion they may say they want the council to say something about them as well, but absolutely will include that in there.
Right.
Certainly what I found is that members ward members are involved in the petition process. So clearly members may want to present a petition directly to council over something that another organisation has influence on. It would be up to the members of that, it'd be up to our council, just, I presume that gets referred to the appropriate body, but I don't see a lot of feedback. If we're truly empowering our citizens, then we should give them the right, without us intervening, to go whichever route they want. Simply by signposting, then we offer that opportunity, and it's just extra information rather than, oh, we'll tell you where to put it. The members of the public will send it where they feel most comfortable, and if that's through their ward councillor issue, then I'm happy to see that. But they may want to go directly to another organisation, even specific to that organisation. That's all I'm saying.
I think how we write that down, but it's been understood by officers and members alike. We've got the point, I think. Now, we've been through it in stages. I think we've agreed all the bits and pieces. I think from the chair, I now suggest that the petition scheme that we have now been through in our deliberation is one that we recommend that the council should adopt. And can I ask if I'll move that from the chair? Is there a second to Councillor Paul Stewart? Are members in agreement? That in that case, we thank officers for all the work that's been put into this and comparisons that have been undertaken. We commend the new petition scheme to council and look forward to it assisting members of the public in making their voice heard appropriately. Thank you. Now, according to me, we don't have any other business, no? And we've concluded everything. So can I thank everyone for their attendance this evening, for the contributions which have helped us steer a debate to a workable conclusion, which I think officers and members will work